I'm Victoria Grech. This is Photographer Academy, and I will be teaching you how to set up video for the first time on your DSLR. I'll try and talk through Nikon a little bit too, because it's very similar. Most of the DSLRs come shipped with the video mode switched off. So the first thing we're going to do is going and switch what's called live view mode on. They are in different places for the Mark III and the Mark II, so do check your manuals, but let's make a start. So if you go into your menu, click along to the yellow hatchet, the second one in, till we've got live view function set. What we want to have on here is it will be disabled, so we want to switch it off from disabled into stills and movie mode. We want to be able to do both. Once you've hit that, you've got options here. The second options are for your grids. Most people have them off. I have it on because I'm a wonky shooter generally. I end up not having horizon straight, and in video we're shooting low res images basically. So we want to make sure that, for me, I have my grids on so I can see and have my horizon straight. The next thing down that I will do, how I change, is I have the live view mode set to live view. There is a mode here with a smiley face on that will try and autofocus. However, I'm going to show you later on how trying to autofocus just blows out your exposure. So unfortunately, we need to make sure we learn to manual focus, and it's not as scary as you think it is. Let's first start off with movie recording size. Now this is to do with something called, you would have heard, 25p, 24p frame rates. What is the frame rate and what does that mean? If you've ever, almost as a kid, like a notepad with a hangman, and you flip those pages quick enough, you'll then see a movie. So what we're shooting here is 25 still images every second, and that is what was going to make our movie. We've got an option here of 25, 24. For the States, you're going to have 60p and 30p. We'll have 50p, 24, and 25p here. So 25 is what you're going to see on TV, advertising, football, anything you're watching. 24 is a little bit more cinematic for cinema. 60 and 50 frames per second. All that is just doubled the frame rate so we can use slow motion, and we'll slow it down in the edit. A lot of people will try shooting 25 frames per second and slowing that down, and you just haven't got enough frames. It will look jolty. So we want to either pick your style, whether you want 25 or 24. I'm going to shoot in 25 today. A point to make here about sound. A lot of people talk about editing the sound. For me, I don't. I leave it on auto because I like to have a good sound off camera, as we went into the kit this morning. For those of you that do want sound, the whole problem with the sound is I can't have a headphone jack in a Mark II, but in a 5D Mark III, I do have a headphone jack and I can see the monitoring. So for me, I leave this on auto. Now let's move on to picture profiles. For me, I never really worried about picture profiles as a photographer. I think I had everything in neutral that I shot, and then I did everything either post or in camera. I'm going to keep saying this over and over again, but video is not raw. We're not shooting raw images. I really wish we could film in RAW on these cameras, but we can't, not without the hacks. So I'm going to ask you to come up with a neutral profile. We want to try and shoot something called flat. And the reason why is then we can boost the colors, we can play around a little bit in the end result. What it is going to happen, however, is it's going to make a difference to your stills. So what I would suggest, for me, I use some droplets and things from Guy Gowan, and all I did was adjust those droplets to what I was taking out of my in-house profile. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to, but my advice is to, because you're not going to nail your exposures or your shoots first of all when shooting video, and you're going to get lazy when you first start because you think you've got the latency of like a raw file, and you're not going to have it, and you'll soon see how much you can just pull up maybe 1 or 2 stops if you're lucky. So what we're going to do is, rather than change the actual preset color profiles here, don't mess around with them, keep those, but actually go into a user-defined setting and make your own. So you can either copy neutral and rename it something. I've left it user def 1. For me, I know that's what I leave all my cameras on now, whether I shoot stills or video. You are going to have to amend your profile for however you edit stills, especially if you're shooting Fusion. If I'm not shooting Fusion, I'm just shooting cinema, then I will shoot on flat profile, and if I'm just doing a still shoot, then I'll go back onto my neutral profile. So let's have a look at what we need to change. We need to bring our sharpness all the way down, completely off. We want to turn the contrast completely off. These two things alone are going to make your images look a little bit flat when you look at the back of your camera now, so don't worry about it, because it's quite easy just to tweak those in your post-production, whether you're doing it manually, which I hope you're not, hopefully you're using batching and droplets, then you can adjust this. Next, take the saturation down 2 stops. This is a basic kind of flat profile for you to save, and it works for all DSLRs. The DSLRs, the video-wise, is so punchy and so contrasty that actually we've got no latency at all. So we kind of want to bring that back and be able to tamper with it. So that's our profile set up, and also our frame rates. Then let's talk about shutter speeds when we're actually filming. I'm already in a 50th of a second here. However, the ideal way to get your shutter speed is doubling your frame rate, which is an old film term. So if I'm shooting in 25 frames per second, then my shutter speed will be 50th of a second. Most of you are now going to panic, because I did. I was like, how am I going to get anything sharp or in focus at 50th of a second? Because even if it's a still shot, I probably shoot 50th, 60th of a second. And even then I'm like, especially if I had loads of Red Bull or sugar. So 50th of a second will give you that long fluid moment. We can, and there's times when we do break the rules and up our shutter speeds. However, if you've seen the intro to The Hobbit recently, it's shot at something like 320 of a second shutter speed. It feels like this, and it's done for a reason. It's kind of be scary, jaunty, jumpy. Do you want your portrait shoot and your wedding shoot to look like that? No. We want fluid, nice video. So try not to ever change your shutter speed. Try and keep it at 50th. The only time I would change it and move it is if something's not moving. If something's moving, don't try and shoot something with a high shutter speed. And I probably only go to 1/60th max ever. Next, let's talk about ISO settings. Obviously, in stills, we want to shoot at the lowest ISO possible range for less grain as we can. However, in a video world on DSLRs, it's very different. They have something called native ISOs. Native ISOs are 160, 320, 640, 1250, and go up from there. So just imagine it as doubling it. So now we're really, lowest we want to shoot is 1/50th. 50th of a second at 160 ISO, we're now thinking, and it's f22 outside. This is when we need to come on to ND filters. So we don't want to move the shutter speed. We don't want to move the ISO, because you're going to get more grain out of 100 ISO than you will something like 640 ISO, which sounds really crazy. Trust me on this. I shot on all the wrong ISOs, all the wrong frame rates, and had terrible films to learn this. So what you could do is, if you still want to shoot shallow depth of field, because the whole point of shooting DSLR video is to have beautiful depth of field like we do in photography, we don't want to shoot at f22. So the way around it is to get a variable ND filter. And the best one I recommend is a Tiffin one or a Heliopan one. They are expensive. The cheap ones definitely don't go with, because they're going to vignette at the ends. And then you've got this horrible vignette that you don't actually want. And as you move the variable NDs to stop down the light, it gets worse and worse. So you pick a good variable ND and use that. And again, this is when I would say to you, sometimes on a job, my ND filter is in my bag and I've forgotten to put it in my pocket. It's really hot. I only have one lens and one tripod or monopod. This is when I will up my shutter a little bit, but I will up my aperture. At the cost of having a jumpy, horrible film, I'll up the aperture, but I'll use something like compression on the 7200. This is when learn all the things you know about photography, about hyperfocal depths, compression of a 7200 anyway, aperture, shutter speeds, all the tricks of the trade that you already know can equate to video. We're just almost shooting in aperture priority all day. That's what we want to try and get you to do, and not touch this shutter. If you've got nowhere else to go but the shutter, up it a little bit, but don't shoot high shutter frame rate or high shutter speeds with kids running around, because it will be like a Hobbit film. It won't look very good. Just run over those ISOs just in case anyone didn't get them again. It's 160, double it to 320, 640, 1250. For me, on the Mark IIs, the ISOs, I have pushed it to 6,400 before, but I've used a continuous light source, pitch black dark, so I've got clean light. If I haven't, I probably will top it at 2,000, if not 1,600. On the Mark IIIs, however, all the way, it's amazing. If you're thinking about upgrading a Mark II to Mark III, photography-wise, there's a little bit of a difference. For video-wise, there's a huge difference. You've got differences between, I only have 12 minutes of record time here before it will cut off, and I have to start again. The Mark III has 30 minutes. Now for me, for a fusion shoot, especially for a wedding, even a civil service will last 20, 25 minutes. I could leave it at the back of the civil service, switch it on, and don't worry about it. When I was filming weddings, church weddings with DSLRs Mark IIs, I would ask my second shoot at the back of the church to keep pressing on and off every 12 minutes. If you do have an unmanned camera that you want to shoot footage with, you've got to remember to come back to it and switch it back on. Now let's move on to white balance. And for me, white balance is mega important. I know a lot of people use auto on the Canons and Nikons. It's fine if you're going to solo shoot. However, if you start shooting with two cameras, you're going to have issues depending on different lighting situations. I like to suggest at least using your daylight, shade, cloudy, maybe the presets, if not using the actual color temperature Kelvins. And I know for some photographers, if I flip this into video mode, you won't see much here, but the Kelvins I can actually change very quickly here. So I can warm up the image, cooler the image from going hotter or colder. Obviously 5,600 is a good start outside. If you want it a bit colder, the lower the number, warmer, higher the number. One of the things I would say here is remember this is not a raw image. I know I've said this over and over again in every tutorial, but honestly, when I've had a really tangoed image and I try and fix it in the edit suite, I can't. There's not the latitude in the images. White balance is literally the first thing. Before you even hit the record button, get your view, get the white balance, get the exposure, and then play around with focus and everything else in direct or get your image. But without nailing this white balance, try not to leave it on auto. You can get away with it, providing you just make sure you look at that screen like you would your image, but be really tough on yourself and say, I can't change the white balance at all. If you can think like that in your head, don't think to do stuff in the edit. If you're a solo shooter, you can't afford to do this. You need to get it right in camera. This will make you a better photographer too, instead of leaving stuff on auto. So I wanted to talk about shutter speed and just mention to you again about, we said always 50th, and then we said about moving it up and breaking the rules. I want to talk about how you break the rules and why you would want to bring it lower than 50th. A lot of the places sometimes have these beautiful uplighters and colors in a room, and the frequency of these lights have a refresh rate. Your eye is never going to see this. The same with TV screens. If you've ever tried to film a TV screen, you're going to see sometimes the refresh rate of a computer screen or a TV screen, depending what hertz its refresh rating, it will jump, like the screen jumps and flickers and has problems. I get this a lot when I'm working in the UAE with their uplighters, that I will either go over to that light and see if I can change the refresh rate down to match my camera, or most of the time I can't, and I can't ask the client to turn the lights off because it makes the room look pretty. So if you down your shutter speed down to a 30th of a second, or even 40, it will get rid of the flicker. What it does do to your actual image is it softens the image a little bit, because remember now we're shooting at 30th of a second, 25 frames. However, it's better than giving your client footage and it's just jumping all over the place. Some other pros and cons of this camera for video is, well, really the cons we need to talk about of any DSLR is you're going to get something called aliasing. Aliasing is to do with, you'll sometimes see it on photography on a grey suit, where you'll see it's like the pixels are jumping. I get it a lot on floors and carpets in hotel rooms that have really weird patterns, and it just the pixels start jumping at you, there is not much you can do about it at all, but just try and crop it out. There are things that you can slip into the mirror. However, I'm too scared to try it. I know some people that have and then couldn't get it back out and had to send it to Canon and had issues. So I would say to you, it's just one of those things. It's like color moire. I've never had a client come to me and say, the color moire in this film, or even my photography, we know it exists, try and work around it, try and work with clean light with the right ISOs, and you'll get less of these problems. The other big issue you'll start to find is rolling shutter. This is to do with the way the camera sensors in DSLRs do not like being moved left to right very quickly. I think I mentioned in another tutorial about a whip pan, which is basically a really quick left to right movement or right to left movement. These cameras really, really don't like it. They tend to kind of jello effect. So one part of the frame will move than the other. Imagine columns, and we're moving along with columns. You'll see this actually in my fusion shoot that I'm going to give you guys to show, where the columns in Brighton Pier, I went too fast with my glide cam and they do this. So you want to be careful, slow, fluid movements, whatever you're doing in film. It's not like photography where we can rapid shoot, move, quick frame. It will slow you down a little bit, but we've got to remember, keep shooting, take your time, fluid left to right movements. We want this to not look like The Hobbit. We want it to look like a nice, beautiful film. So that ties up setting up your camera for video. I'll see you soon.